You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby. Listen to conversations with award-winning filmmakers, directors from the golden age of television, and creatives from the indie film community who continue to inspire the next generation of filmmakers. And now, over to your host, Damian Swaby.
Welcome to a new episode of Filmmaking Conversations with me, Damian Swaby. I'm excited to host the esteemed editor Cheryl Potter, known for her work on HBO's flagship series, The Nevers, Ridley Scott's The Martian, and Amazon's epic series, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, and so much more. Cheryl's career spans over 2 decades, during which she has collaborated with renowned directors such as Tim Burton, Ron Howard, and James Mangold. She has also worked alongside high-profile editors like Pietro Scalia, Dody Dorn, Jill Bilcock, and Billy Rich. In our conversation, we'll explore the nuances of editing for different mediums, discuss the use of Apted Media Composer, and hear about the challenges and rewards of shaping captivating narratives. Join me for this insightful conversation with Cheryl Potter on Filmmaking Conversations. Cheryl, how are you today?
I am very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on. You're going to be an excellent guest. I know that so much. You've done so many brilliant shows, so much great work, and I always enjoy speaking to fabulous editors. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be here.
To start things off, I really, really want to know, how did you get started in editing? How did it all begin for you? Did you go to film school, or did you gradually work on set and become an editor? What was the process like for you?
For me, it was, I did go to film school, or rather I went to the Queensland University of Technology and did their film and television course, which was an arts course majoring in film and TV production. So that course was how I sort of learned what editing was, because prior to that, I think like most people, I knew I wanted to be involved in making films and television, but I wasn't sure. Like, I think everybody else, it's like, oh yeah, you want to direct, but that's just because you don't really know what the other roles are. Yeah. And then once I found out what editing was, it was like, oh, right, this is how my brain works. And so I was lucky enough to be at a university where we were being taught how to use Apted Media Composer. This was back when it was still extremely expensive to have Apted Media Composer. We only had 2 units in the film school. And so you had to like book your time to go and use it. They were on these ancient like Apple computers. Like it was old school. But that was sort of my experience of learning how to use that software. And that is the same software that I still use to this day to cut on. So it was very, very helpful that was to learn that when I was still studying, and to still be using it now 20 something years later. That's pretty good.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, as far as I'm aware, Apted is, perhaps I'm right by saying, the industry standard in many ways for many projects and many films and TV shows. A lot of people use other software, but for you to have used it 20 years ago and for you to still be using it sounds amazing. What other editing software would you have learned to use when you was training?
I feel like not long after that was, Final Cut started to come in, and then eventually Adobe Premiere became, Premiere is quite popular now for things that are lower budget, smaller teams. So there was a chance that had I been learning, 5 years later, I would have learned Final Cut and then come into the industry and discover that actually some things get cut on Final Cut, but, most things are cut on Apted. And I've always said that if I need to learn a piece of software to do a project, I will absolutely learn it. I don't want knowing a particular piece of software to stand in the way of me being able to do a show. But it's just so happened that there's been a couple of times where I've nearly had to do that, but then the show hasn't come about. So it's just, I'm just still an Avid girl after all this time.
Nice one. I'm glad to hear it that you enjoy using Avid still. So editing, exactly. It's an amazing thing. It's so creative. You know, not everybody can be great at it, but everybody can try. I think now with the way we can access technology, software, we can access. Everybody's got editing software on the laptop, no matter if it's Windows Movie Maker or right up to Avid. Why did you want to get into editing, and what about it really attracts you as a creative?
It's where there's sort of the story. What do they call it? They sometimes say that the edit is the final rewrite of the film, and so that part of it really appeals to me. But also, you know, it's where all the pieces come together. It really is kind of the hub of where the whole film gets pulled into shape, because you're taking everything that was done on set, you're taking the footage that was shot on set, you're picking out the performances that tell the story the best, figuring out what order to put those shots in, but then also you're the pathway to the sound department, to the visual effects department, to the music department, and all of, you know, like in a perfect world, all of those things, you'll send the cuts out to all those different people, and they're all working on the version of the film that you're working on. And then you're taking the pieces that they're creating and sticking them back in the edit. So it really does feel like you're working at the coal fire face of, you know, where the film is really kind of being polished and finished. And, you know, like it's where you're turning it into its final product. So as much as being on set can be really exciting and seeing it like all happening, and that's where the actors are and that's where the sets are. And I do love to have the experience of being able to go to set and seeing all that. But I also feel terribly, terribly out of place whenever I'm on set, because it's like, there isn't anything for me to do. I don't have a purpose here. Like I have to, eventually I'll receive this footage and then I will put it together in my dark room by myself. But on set, like it's, as for all of it's like how exciting it is to see all of this beautiful craft that's happening. Like at the end of the day, it's like where I, you know, do my best work is in the cutting room.
But being on set, I thought, because it might not be something that you would not, it might not be something where you would normally be. It would be quite exciting or revealing, like almost being a fly on the wall in a situation where you are going to be a part of something, but on that day you're just kind of watching it all go by.
Yes, it is exciting, absolutely, and you have so much respect for the process. But also, there's just something about, and maybe it's because editors tend to be, you know, less extroverted.
Yeah.
We're very used to being in our dark, quiet rooms, but because it's something I've talked about with other editors, and everybody's kind of like, yeah, no, I feel the same, because you just like I don't think there's any way you can stand on set and not be in someone's way eventually. And there's that kind of sense of, well, you don't need more bodies hanging around. Like if you don't have a purpose to be there, then maybe you shouldn't be there. I don't know.
Yeah, I can understand where you're going in that way. So out of all the departments, which department do you particularly feel you gel best with when you have to give out cuts and send out edits?
It's gosh, it's a tie, I reckon, between sound department and visual effects department, because they're two pieces of the puzzle that fit so closely together with the edit, and you really do need to keep everybody in the loop. And music also, they need to sort of know exactly what's happening with the cut. But I feel like with visual effects and sound, if you're making even the tiniest changes, they can have really big repercussions. And
Okay.
so there is that, if you can get in a really good rhythm with those departments, so that if you know there's a change coming up and you know that it's going to affect them, that you can kind of loop them in and make sure that they know where it's coming from and why it's happening. It just feels like that's a really the best way to work it. That feels like the departments where you just want to make sure like everybody's walking in lockstep, because that's in the back end of post is when you kind of, things are starting to get crunched, you're starting to run out of time. And if you make a change that's going to affect, like, you know, a whole other department and cost them a bunch of time to try and, you know, adjust for that, you want to give them as much heads up as possible.
I see. And can you tell us about a time when you worked on a project and you really excelled working with the sound and visual departments?
I mean, I feel like that's been most of the projects that I've
Oh,
worked on.
great.
Like the role of the visual effects editor on a show is that they're a person who's working in editorial. They manage all the visual effects on the editorial side. So they have to sort of serve two masters. They have to kind of deal with the visual effects department, but they also deal with editorial department. And I feel like on most of the shows I've been on, we've had a really great visual effects editor who's a really good communicator. So I can just go in and be like, hey, I'm about to change the cut. I'm about to make, like a whole bunch of trims in this scene. And I've just made this very expensive shot, like half a second longer. And these are all changes that are going to come down the line, and then they can take that and run with it, go and tell the visual effects supervisor, the VFX producer, let's make sure that these changes can be made. Can we do this?
And earlier you spoke about performances. As part of your job is obviously picking the best performances in the edit. Are there any particular performers that we may have heard of that you really enjoyed editing their work?
Oh, so many. Oh my goodness, so many. Like on Rings of Power, Miv, who played Galadriel, she's wonderful. Like just what she can bring with just a look or a breath, it's just so often the ones who really kind of blow you away are the ones who like are the most like, they can be quite the shyest, sweetest people in real life. And then once the camera's rolling, it's just mind-blowing. Like, but it's the level of talent when you're going through the footage and you're just watching raw footage, it's just straight out of the camera, a clean take, like from beginning to end. And you're just, because I like to watch my dailies in real time, and you just watch just raw footage. It hasn't even been cut together. You don't even know what the surrounding shots are going to be yet. And you're like, I'm getting emotional watching this raw take. And like, this is how moved I am by what this actor is doing. And that, that's when you've got something special. That's when you're like, oh, this is going to be a good scene. This scene is going to be something really special. And now the responsibility is on me as the editor to do justice to this incredible performance that I've been given. I have to make sure that I feature it, that I put it together so that everybody gets to have that reaction that I had. And it's a big responsibility. And it's just like, it's the best thing that can happen to you, but it's also like, oh my God, now I need to step up.
Oh man, that sounds amazing. That really does. From the raw footage as well, just grabbing it and having that kind of feeling towards what you've seen. That just sounds like a dream come true, if I'm honest. That's what it sounds like. Do you ever get to have these type of conversations with other editors? And what is it like being an editor, having relationships with other editors? Does that help you, or does that maybe not something you're interested in? A lot of my friends are video producers, do a lot of corporate video work, and sometimes we'll meet up down the pub and we'll have a good old moan about certain situations, or we find solutions for each other's problems at work. How does it work for you professionally with editing friends?
Oh, so many of my friends are editors, and they're just some of the best people. And I think no one can understand you the way that people who do the same job as you can understand you.
Yeah.
And even when I was still an assistant editor working on feature films, like the other assistants that you were working with and the editors that you would work with, because they're teams, it's like a big team of people. There might be 12 of you, there might be 13, 20 of you if you count all of the assistant editors, the editors, the visual effects editors. Like it can be quite a large team. You're spending like 10, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week together. You want to get along. And then you go through the wars and you're like doing crazy hours to prep for a screening, and everybody's got to pull together and make sure you come out the back end and like actually really deliver this thing. And it's, if it's the bonds that you come away with having done that stuff together. And when you can rely on the people around you because it's just that good of a team. It's just, I don't know. I feel like some of my best friendships have come out of some of the most difficult shows that I've worked on, because you come out the other end and you just know this person's got your back. And you have all of your ways of dealing with the craziness and the stress and the silly songs that you sing. Or we used to have like, on one of the shows I worked on, we put like a big poster on the wall and we'd give people points when they would say something really nerdy and it was like a race to see who was the biggest nerd, and just silly things like that get you through the crazy hours and the craziness. But then when I started working in television, what was really cool was it's like now you're working on a TV series and there are other editors on the TV series. And so you're not the only editor. So you can go in and like check in with the other editors and be like, hey, would you mind having a look at this scene and see how it plays for you? Or what were they doing in your episode that now that they're doing this in my episode, and how can we make sure that's talking to each other? And I just feel like editors really do look out for each other. And if you're offered a show and you can't do it, they might recommend you.
Oh, nice.
And having worked with some really awesome editors over the years, like Pietro Scalia and Dody Dorn, McCusker, what I've learned from just watching them work, I just feel so lucky that I've been able to see how they handle stuff, how they do things, and, try and absorb as much of that as possible by osmosis and put it into play in the way that not just how I cut, but how you deal with other people and how you manage a room and how you kind of take the notes. That side of it has been like, I don't know. I just feel like editors are the best people, and I'm really lucky to have so many good friends who are editors.
Amazing. So when you were an assistant editor and you said you've learned for some huge, big names that are really, really fantastic editors, what things in particular did you learn?
The most important stuff, I think, is just seeing how they work, seeing the ways that, because as the assistant, you're the one loading all the footage. So you're, quite often we'd be doing syncing in Avid. And so you're watching the footage, you're checking the footage. And so what all the raw footage is that you're prepping and handing over to the editor to cut with. And then you get to see the cuts, their first cut, their next cut, because generally you're the one who's going to be making any outputs and things. So even if you're not in the room with them, and sometimes you are, because you quite often do end up with excellent editors who are happy for you to sit in and they're happy for you to audition things for them. But even if you're just seeing the progress of what their cuts are and like where the changes are happening and what's shifting about it after things have, gone through the director or the studio or the producers, what's different? What are we changing? What are we moving? What scenes are we dropping? What scenes are we changing the order of? And how are we adjusting the cut to make it better or to address a note or to make something clearer? And so much of that was just being in the room and seeing the progression of the cut. But then also just, it's so wonderful to see how they deal with the other collaborators on a show. How do they talk to the director? How do they deal with the visual effects department or the music department? Or what are they like when they're doing a spotting session? What kind of things do they talk about? What kind of language do they use? I just feel like so much of it, it's hard to say I learned this one lesson, because so much of it was just sort of like I was just absorbing it like a sponge.
Yeah. Great. I'm glad you got to do that. And you mentioned notes earlier, getting notes. Sometimes people don't deal with getting notes in maybe the best ways. I can give an example of when last month a young editor I was working with, he got some notes. He basically got an essay given to him about what he should do. And he didn't particularly appreciate those type of notes. When you get notes, has there ever been a time when you had to have a difficult conversation with someone about what was required from them?
Honestly, I feel like sometimes you get notes and you're like, well, this is a bad note, or you're like, what's being suggested isn't a good, like, you can sort of look at it and go, I don't think this is going to work. But then the trick is to not necessarily always just take all notes at face value. Usually if someone's giving a note, they're giving a note because something in that area of the cut is bothering them. So they might be suggesting, let's cut this shot, or let's make this scene shorter, or let's insert a line of additional dialogue explaining something else. And it could be that all of those suggestions aren't a good suggestion, but it's telling you there's a problem there. It's telling you that in that area, something about the cut isn't working. And what can sometimes happen if you get compiled notes that come from several different people, you might have 3 different people make a comment or a suggestion on the same section. And so then even if none of their suggestions are a workable solution, you know that there's a problem that needs to be solved there. And so it's that trick of, if you get notes and you don't think it's a good note, why is it, you have to question, why am I getting the note? And what is the note behind the note? And then what is the solution? Because you should always try anything that gets put out there. Like, I think if you get a note and it's a crappy note and you think it might not work, try it anyway, because it might work. Like, the number of times I've been given a suggestion and you're like, oh, I don't think that's going to work. I think that's going to be hokey or cringy. But then you try it and you're like, actually, there might be something here. Maybe we just, like, try it properly and see if maybe we can make this work. But then on the other hand, even if what's being suggested isn't the right solution, it's telling you there's a problem there. And then it's like, let's figure out what the problem is. Is the reason that everybody's commenting on this scene because there's a problem with the scene? Or is it because we've just had a run of 3 other scenes and they were too slow and we need to pace up this area? And so you're feeling a referred pain. Like, by the time you get to the scene, you're a little bit bored. And maybe it's not actually a problem with this scene, but the problem with the 3 scenes that came before it.
I see. Really, really good. I really like that answer. That's given me a lot of food for thought, if I'm honest there. So you get notes like that, and you've obviously worked out the ways to solve these type of problems. One of the polls I ran on Instagram story, because of the nature of the amount of brilliant people you've worked with, I put out a poll: who out of the list of names would you like me to discuss with Cheryl Potter? Luckily, I think some of the people following me know who I really like, a certain Ridley Scott. I think he's okay. He's brilliant.
All right, I suppose.
Yeah,
one of the greatest living directors in the world.
Yeah,
I don't know. Exactly. He's okay, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So he's someone you've been a part of his projects, one of his projects in particular. What was your experience like on that project, and would you like to tell us which one it is?
Are you talking about the Martian? Cool. Yeah, because I also worked on Alien Covenant and Exodus Gods and Kings. So we sort of did 3 in a row, which was really great. Like, we just kind of rolled from one to the other to the other. And I just, he just has such a confidence, which is born from someone who's been doing this for such a long time. Yeah. And his whole approach to directing, I think a lot of the time he's just like, if you cast it right, then you don't have to do very much directing because you've chosen the right people. And if you have good crew around you, so if he's chosen, a good production designer who he can trust, if he's chosen a good DP, like, he's worked with Darius for years and he has so much trust in him. There's like, it's almost like the approach of it, it's like, it shouldn't be hard. You just want to surround yourself with the right people, which I think is really, really smart.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Why make life hard for yourself in that way? And he's always, from what I can see, done the right thing when I've seen the final production. But you mentioned the other films you've worked on with him. In what capacity were you an editor or an assistant editor in those other films?
I was an associate editor on Exodus Gods and Kings, working with Billy Rich, who is a wonderful, wonderful editor and still a good friend. And then on The Martian, I was working with Pietro, and on that film, I got an additional editor credit, which was very exciting. And I also was an additional editor on Alien Covenant.
And what is an associate editor? I haven't heard of that title before. Sorry.
That's all right. It's sort of a place where if you're on a big show, usually there's like, if you're on a small show and it's just the editor and the first assistant editor will manage like everything aside from just actually cutting the film. So manage getting all the footage in, doing all the outputs, making sure that all the other departments have what they need. But then they'll also do creative stuff for the editor, like, assembling scenes, doing sound effects work, doing music work, doing all sorts of stuff to keep, the edit looking and sounding good and polished. That isn't necessarily the actual cutting work, although it will quite often involve, throwing together scenes or doing assemblies if and when necessary. So there's a point where you can divide the role of a first assistant editor into the first assistant editing, which is all of the sort of technical and managerial stuff, and then the associate editor, which is the creative side of that role, without having to do the technical and managerial stuff, because it's such a big show and there's too much to do. So you've divided the role into two. And so you have a first assistant editor and an associate editor.
I see. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up for me. And those films that you mentioned are huge, like some of the other work you've worked on. And over the years, I've spoke about it earlier with another guest on the podcast. We've seen television change. It's, I think we're in like a kind of golden age. It's just like my opinion. We're seeing some breathtaking, big, bold, gigantic productions, and we're seeing some smaller productions that make and tell some amazing emotional stories. You've worked on feature films, as we discussed, and you've also worked on a certain television series that's on Amazon. Can you tell us about that series and what are the major differences between working on a feature film and working on an episodic production such as Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power?
It's interesting that of the TV credits that I have, that the one that you've mentioned, Rings of Power, is probably the one that felt most like working on a feature film in terms of the way that it ran. Like, I think from the very beginning, from very early on, I remember being told, we're not really looking at this as episodic television. We're looking at this as, an 8-hour feature film that's broken into parts. And so much of how they approached that particular show, they were bringing a feature film approach to it, right down to the way that it was sort of mixed and finished and the visual effects were handled. And, in feature film land, usually the editor will stay on till the very end. So after the cut is locked, putting, inverted commas around locked, because it's never really locked. The editor will still stay on, and they'll sit in on the mix stage, and they'll go to the music spots, and they'll be very involved in all of the other finishing that goes on, because they're someone who's been on the whole way through and can continue to offer, advice and guidance, even if there isn't too much cutting still happening. But in the land of television, usually once your episodes get locked, you don't really get to stick around, because they'll have these sort of rolling stacked schedules where you bring on an editor, they'll cut 2 episodes, and then once their episodes are locked, they'll move on, and then the second block's happening with the second editor, and there's a bit more of a turnover, and it's a bit faster, and I think a lot of it's budget driven. So an editor on a television series, generally you don't get to stick around for the mix and the final visual effects and doing all of that finishing stuff that you would get to do on a feature film. So that's what I thought was really interesting, was that on Rings, I did get to stick around and do all those things, which is more like on a feature film.
Oh, okay. That makes sense, because Rings is by nature a lot bigger than maybe, from what I can see, a lot bigger than a general television episodic program from HBO, for example. But is there anything you've done that's kind of maybe a bit smaller than Lord of the Rings? Anything that maybe have a more traditional sense, inverted commas, of television that you may have been associated with?
Oh, completely. Like every other television show that I've done, like Hannah, Snowpiercer, The Nevers, Alienist, Angel of Darkness. Like, these were all shows where there was a point where it was like, okay, we're good. Your episodes are locked, and we're not continuously fiddling with them. So thank you for your time, and then you finish. And so then quite often when you watch the show go to air, that's when you get to hear the final composer's score. That's when you get to see, a whole bunch of the visual effects that weren't ready when you were still locking the episode. So it's a different experience working in TV, because quite often there's a point where it's like, well, the actual cutting is done, and now, I entrust these episodes to you, and then they will get finished sort of without the editor being present for it.
I see. Which do you prefer doing? Which is your...
Oh, I love being on till the end. I loved the process of working on Rings of Power and being able to be on the mixing stage and being able to see all of the visual effects coming in. And if, there's little tiny tweaky changes that need to happen because you're finally getting to see a shot for the first time and you're like, wow, this shot's amazing. Can we just use more of it? And so that sometimes when being around in that final process can make it easier, because there might be little detail things that you'll pick up on, as being someone who's been living with the edit for so long, to be able to sort of offer up, oh, well, when we cut this scene and we put this temporary sound effect in, the intention of the director was this, and then that information can be useful to the people who are going to do the final sound or the people who are going to be doing the final music. They can understand what the intention was, and because you're the through line, you were there at the beginning, and then you can be there at the end to sort of pass down, well, this is what was being discussed when we made this decision.
And you, with all your experience in television and film and working with so many great people, when you were growing up watching television and watching films and maybe going to the cinema with family or friends, how do you think the shows you liked, and what were the shows you liked that may have influenced you now as an editor?
Oh, I mean, I was all about escapism, I think. When going to the movies or watching films at home, it was always going to a different place. It's the sci-fi and the fantasy and the adventure. Like, those were the films that spoke to me and that excited me, and they were the ones that I wanted to see. So I think the kind of shows that I've gotten to work on, now that I'm sort of getting to be more specific about what shows I'd like to cut, I think that really reflects the kind of shows that sparked my imagination. To be able to work on stuff that's got an element of magic to it, or it's set in a different time, whether it is in the future, it's in the past. And also, I feel like I've been really lucky to work on a lot of shows that have really amazing central female characters that are the characters who are driving the story forward a lot of the time. And that wasn't necessarily what I'd set out to do, but I feel really lucky that is how it turned out.
Oh, excellent. I'm glad your luck came in and it turned out that way. And lastly, what would you say to young female editors that are listening to the podcast that would really look at your work and look at the amount of work you've done and hope to have a career similar to yourself? I
would say get out there and go for it. Absolutely. Like, as you were saying earlier on, the barrier to entry to learning how to make films, or to learn how to do the various tasks involved in making films. I mean, that anybody can do it now. Like, back when I was still in university, it's like, to get your hands on a camera was difficult. Cameras were expensive. Film was expensive. Editing equipment was crazy expensive. And now it's like you have all of that in your phone, and everybody has a phone, and like anybody can go out and shoot stuff and learn how to cut stuff. Like, my 12-year-old niece, like, she puts together little animations,
Great.
Like, and puts them to music and stuff. It's like, she's 12. It's so awesome. So the fact that it is so accessible now is fantastic. So it's get out there and make stuff, because the more that you do, the better that you're going to get at it. And the only way to learn how to edit is to edit. Just start sticking things together, and after a while you'll realize, oh, actually, like, my gut is telling me to put it together this way. And so much about the language of film, if you're a lover of film and you've been watching films your whole life, which we all, so many of us have, I think you learn that language innately, and the rhythms of how a film wants to be cut and how the shots want to be put together. Like, so much of that can just be, you following your gut as you're putting the shots down on the timeline. But I feel like that gut feeling of I want to be wide now. Okay, now I want to be tight, and now I want to be on this person. Now I want to be on that person. I think a lot of those rhythms and patterns are things that have been kind of, you've absorbed them into your brain from having watched other people's work and having watched other films, and you kind of just learn this is the rhythm of feature film, or this is the rhythm of visual storytelling, and you just kind of pick up on it.
Great words. I love it. But I must know, I did say finally, but I must know and I must ask, have you got a film coming out soon that we'll be able to watch?
I've just finished work on a television series, but I cannot say what it is yet.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
So we'll have to wait a little while for that one. But of course, once we have, trailers out and once it's imminent, I'll be shouting from the rooftops, of course.
Okay. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you coming on. You said some great stuff, and I hope to speak to you soon.
It was really fun chatting with you. Thanks so much.
Have you thought of upgrading your cinematography game? Would you like to have an ASC cinematographer mentor you for free? Join veteran cinematographer Suki Medenzovic, ASC, Disney, Pixar, FX Networks, Netflix, American Horror Story. As he teaches you how to create beautiful images using 3 lighting techniques he has mastered on film sets over his 30-plus years in the film industry. Each technique uses basic, low-cost lighting equipment so that anyone can achieve beautiful visuals no matter your project's budget. If you want to take your cinematography to the next level, visit filmmakingconversations.com to sign up for instant access. If you like this podcast, share it with friends, leave a comment in the comments section, and hit the subscribe button.